Thanks for joining me for the Fair Play Rewind event today. My name is Lena Nahlus and I'm the CEO of Diversity Arts Australia. As we come into this space of listening, reflecting and knowledge sharing, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which the speakers and I are joining from today, the unceded lands of the Kulin Nation and of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to First Peoples joining us today. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Today's conversations reflect on the Fair Play program. And for those who don't know, Fair Play started as a capacity building program for creative industry organisations in Victoria. The program was initiated and funded by Creative Victoria, and it came out of sector consultation and was developed through co-design. I commend the Victorian Government and Creative Victoria for taking steps to make this happen. Fair Play addresses barriers to participation by communities who are already underrepresented in the creative industries. And the focus of the program was on First Nations, deaf and disabled, and underrepresented culturally and linguistically diverse communities. The program launched with the Fair Play Symposium in 2019 at the Wheeler Centre, and the plan was to run for 2 years with 20 organisations. But the universe had different ideas and COVID hit. So the program has run over 30 months, and in addition to the 20 creative industry organisations, we've also run it with 8 Victorian music businesses. Diversity Arts Australia delivered the program in partnership with our key training and project partners, Koorie Heritage Trust and Arts Access Victoria. And for the music industries program, with our key partner, the Victorian Music Development Office. We have many more partners, educators and trainers who I'll acknowledge a little bit later on. So the program aims to empower individuals and organisations with knowledge, resources and support to advance equity and inclusion. And the program also seeks to address the root causes that lead to inequity and exclusion and to have a transformative focus. So it concentrates on systemic change, providing organisations with equity audits, mentoring, training and equity action planning. The last 2 years has brought to the forefront issues of inequity. Global events like Black Lives Matter movement have heightened critical discussions around race, colonisation and justice. And in Australia, these conversations have been led by First Nations people and particularly in the context of the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody movement. The creative sector was impacted severely by the pandemic and the associated lockdowns and loss of work. And these also made us acutely aware of the precarity for communities who were already marginalised. So today, we're pleased to be presenting these really important and timely conversations that bring together our partners, educators, trainers and participants to reflect on the impacts of a program like Fair Play. I'd like to start by welcoming the Minister for the Creative Industries, Danny Pearson.
Today, I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands you are all beaming in from, and for all First Nations people who are part of today's event. I'm delighted to be here to celebrate your participation in the Fair Play program, which is all about equity and inclusion in the creative industries. This program was born out of the Victorian Government's first Creative State Strategy, released back in 2016, and is part of our work to ensure that our creative industries reflect the diversity of the Victorian community. All Victorians, regardless of their cultural or socio-economic background, age, gender or disability, should have opportunities to pursue creative careers at all levels, to see themselves reflected on our stages, screens, gallery walls, and indeed our boardrooms, and to engage with rich, meaningful and relevant creative and cultural experiences. So often when we talk about inclusion in the creative industries, the roadblocks can seem so broad and varied they almost become overwhelming. The fact that Fair Play is the first program of its kind in Australia speaks volumes, and that's why today is so significant. Not only are we celebrating you, the first crop of organisations to finish the program, but also how your participation has highlighted the benefits of fair play to arts organisations throughout Australia. Thanks to your involvement, they've seen how this program can work. So much so that they've signed on to complete a version of it themselves. As you move forward and put the learnings from fair play into practice, know that the Victorian Government is working alongside you. We want to champion diverse content, creative practitioners and leaders throughout the sector. Our new Creative State 2025 strategy, launched in July of this year, further emphasises our commitment to a fairer, more inclusive sector. One of the guiding principles of this strategy is that the creative industries are for every Victorian, and it acknowledges there is further work to be done to achieve true cultural equity. And this work is vitally important at an organisational level, a sector level, and at a societal level. It makes us better and it makes us stronger. I applaud the teams at Diversity Arts Australia and the training partners they collaborated with, the Koorie Heritage Trust, Arts Access Victoria, Vmdo Foundation and the Wurundjeri Tribal Council, and all the organisations who took part in the Fair Play program. It takes introspection and courage to take a good hard look at your practices, identity, and address barriers and effect change. I encourage you all to maintain that sense of courage and commitment to change as you program events, commission work, employ people, and add new and interesting perspectives to the cultural conversation, because those viewpoints will help keep Victoria's creative sector as vital and as exciting as ever. And that is exactly what we need right now. Thank you so very much for having me.
Hello all. My name is Gabrielle Ryan and I'm the Head of Production and Relationships at the Wheeler Centre for Books, Writing and Ideas in Naarm, or what is now known as Melbourne. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and I acknowledge that sovereignty over this land has never been ceded. I stand here as the beneficiary of ongoing colonial violence and genocide of the country's first people, and acknowledge that a recognition of that history is an essential starting point for every conversation, particularly those about diversity, access and inclusion. The Wheeler Centre is very proud to be supporting this Fair Play Rewind event, hosted by Diversity Arts Australia, and reflecting on the organisations who have taken part in the Fair Play program so far. Our partnership with Diversity Arts Australia started at the end of 2018, when we started to plan for the Fair Play Symposium, which was held over 2 days in February 2019. I often reflect back on that symposium as an important point in the journey that I and the organisation have been on. Soon after this symposium, my role at the organisation changed, and I had the opportunity to lead the Centre's access and inclusion initiatives, the first time we'd had a senior role set up with explicit and named accountability for this important work. At the same time, I knew I had support from across the entire team, and this was work we all believed in. We all had a strong belief that arts and cultural organisations need to take seriously their responsibility to challenge, rather than reinforce, the status quo, to recognise the inherent inequity in the systems that create and sustain us, to question, rather than simply receive, history and inherited knowledge, and to own and confront our privilege. In 2018, not long before we started to work with Diversity Arts Australia, the Wheeler Centre, along with the organisations co-located here at our beautiful home in the city, had undertaken Footscray Community Arts Centre's 3-day Generate program, focusing on working in First Nations cultural contexts. We were in a really great position to take advantage of being one of the first 10 organisations selected in the Fair Play program in 2019. Here at the Wheeler Centre, we're in the business of creating and facilitating conversations. It's what we do, and we were already seeing a wide representation of different voices and perspectives in our events on stage and in our other public-facing activities and mentorships such as the Next Chapter, Signal Boost and Hot Desk Fellowships. But the Fair Play audit at the beginning of the Fair Play program showed us starkly what we already knew. We had a lot of work to do internally to have that same representation reflected behind the scenes in the people within the organisation who were curating, commissioning, producing and promoting those conversations. So this became the most important goal of the Fair Play program. We worked through it with our mentors Hua Pham and Andy Butler, with Margaret and the team, and our many workshop facilitators. We set up a representative working group across all the teams. We got the opportunity to work closely with people in the organisation that our jobs wouldn't necessarily make us work closely with otherwise. We made sure all the goals and strategies of the plan had input from every touchpoint of the organisation. The formal structure of organised meetings meant that we needed to carve out time for deep thinking and discussion about access and inclusion, usually in the middle of very busy work weeks and work days. We all know that even with the best of intentions, without that structure, without those workshops and the mentorships and the commitment of the diversity arts team, the project could easily have lost momentum and been swamped by other priorities and pressures. Having the formal support of Diversity Arts Australia and Creative Victoria was and continues to be critical from an advocacy perspective as well. Having the Equity Action Plan that we developed through Fair Play as a robust document has helped give us the framework and the language to be able to talk about this work in really concrete terms to the board, in funding applications and acquittals, in annual reports, and in our new strategic and business plans. Our new strategic plan is entitled Conversations to Create Change, and the principles of access and inclusion are deeply embedded across all of its goals and strategies. We're serious about this work. So what is the measurable impact so far, and where are we going with it? As I mentioned before, the Fair Play audit backed up our belief that we were already doing fairly well with representation in our program and public-facing activity. That's not to say, of course, that we can't do better. And the Fair Play program and Equity Action Plan have enabled our programming team to formalise essential commitments to equity and inclusion, which were previously ad hoc or underdeveloped. We have deepened our understanding of and commitment to community-led programming and co-curated programming. We are working on a formal framework for reciprocity in these programming partnerships with underrepresented communities and curators. We are starting to question and reshape some of the structures of power and agency in the decision-making and curation of our programs. We are handing some of that power to others and being led by them. This is work that will continue to grow over the next few years and beyond. We are also committed to retaining the accessibility that digital events have given our audiences, even after we are able to go back to meeting in person once again. I've touched on the core goal of staff diversification. My role has changed again to encompass people and culture, the relationships part of my title, and this is inextricably integrated with the access and inclusion work that sits alongside it. This is the organisation's investment in its people and its culture, and in making that culture as accessible and inclusive as possible. 18 months ago, the board recruited a new CEO, Cara Llewellyn, who has a disability. Clearly, Cara's appointment has reinforced for us the importance of accessibility in everything we do and given us a powerful new lens to look through. We've been heavily focused on rewriting and reframing our recruitment policies, processes and documentation. We've redeveloped our position descriptions for new roles, taking out references to qualifications, specific experience and hard skills, except where they are absolutely necessary for performing the role. We have rewritten these PDs to focus more on soft skills and have not presented these as key selection criteria, but as attributes for people to respond to in their own way. We've made a commitment to the professional development of staff and reshaped our performance review processes to support staff to upskill in areas where they might have less experience. We're just about to finalise new policies that entrench flexible working arrangements, new leave categories, including cultural, menstrual and disability leave, and a new recruitment and selection policy that outlines a hiring philosophy with access and inclusion at its core. We're moving away from hiring on merit to a more equitable recruitment that recognises and seeks to overcome systemic barriers to employment in the arts. We've also just undertaken a maturity assessment with our new partner Jobs Bank, focusing on both inclusive hiring and social procurement, and we look forward to seeing and implementing the recommendations of those reports when we receive them. We have many more challenges still to address, but we know that this is ongoing work that will continue to evolve and change. We are very grateful to have been involved with the Fair Play program, as it motivated us to do the groundwork of creating a framework for access and inclusion when we really needed one. And that has given us a really solid foundation and a longer-term plan to work towards. We're excited to see where this work will take us.
Firstly, thank you so much, Rob, for making the time to have this chat via Zoom for the Fair Play final event to kind of reflect on the Fair Play program. Can you start by introducing yourself and a little bit about the work you do at Koorie Heritage Trust?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rob Hyatt, as you know, and I'm a Manager of Education and Visitor Experience at the Koorie Heritage Trust. Covering off two bits, I guess. I'll quickly do the visitor experience part because we are open again finally and we're starting to get visitors through. So part of the Koorie Heritage Trust is about engagement with the broader community, and in particular people that come into the city and can physically visit the trust. So we have our galleries, engagement with our, Aboriginal businesses and artists across the state that do actually present their work into the trust. And we also have our collections, which is actually quite important, telling the history of Aboriginal Victoria. And an element of that is pre-colonisation and I guess the journey of Aboriginal Victoria through to, the present day. And so we operate a visitor experience around the trust and also our tours to learn a bit about Aboriginal Melbourne. But I think probably with the engagement that we've had with you is through our education programs. And so we run basically cultural competency and cultural safety workshops across pretty much any industry, actually.
Thank you. That was really good. Really good introduction to the work of Koorie Heritage Trust and the education program. And it's great that it's reopening. It's so excellent.
Finally.
Finally. So I wanted to ask why it's important to have an equity and inclusion program that's participatory like Fair Play, particularly for the creative industries in Victoria.
The participation side of it is probably the most important because there's a lot we could present, whether it's just text or, reading and those kind of things. And you can read about other people's experiences. You can have your own understanding if you want to look up, definitions of equity or definitions of cultural safety, whatever that might be. But I think being participatory, it becomes more about engagement and the fact that we connect. And I think that understanding other people's experiences, especially in those sort of spaces, actually has to be, connected through voice. And I think that's been one of the more amazing opportunities that we have through the programs that we've ran and the work that we've done with Fair Play, because it's actually, we're engaging with the industry and learning from their perspective what it is that they do, how they want to engage, what the industry looks like from an individual gallery to, some of the larger organisations. But then having the opportunity to listen to our stories and what it looks like for us in terms of experience, and that experience of engaging, whether it's industries, galleries, art, whatever it might be, is much more about the story as to what that engagement means, why, certain elements of competency or safety are important. And I think you just can't get that from a textbook. I think you just can't get that from reading, but listening to people. And it also means we get to learn about them. And while I can talk about what equity might mean for me or might mean for First Nations people, actually having an understanding from those organisations we engage with of what it actually looks like for them is also important, so that we can then determine together what an appropriate environment might look like that is equitable, that is inclusive and is culturally safe as well.
I like that reciprocity, that exchange is really important. And I guess talking about what you've been saying about sharing stories and sharing experiences in that way that is, I guess through that, particularly through that lived experience. I wanted to ask what the importance is of having people with lived experience delivering the training, because the program was always delivered by people who had the lived experience of the communities who the training was, focused on.
For my own self, when I actually did present and was able to tell some of my own stories, some of the ways I would connect and what that might mean to me from a First Nations point of view was quite important. But I think I actually picked up even more when there were other First Nations people that were present, and they might have had the opportunity to tell a little bit of their story, but also shared some workshops around disability, sexuality, and called communities. And when you start to listen to other people's stories, living the experience yourself is one thing, and being able to share that is really important, because, again, it's about that engagement and people being able to hear firsthand experience, I think is really important. But I think it actually held even more important to me when I actually heard other people's stories. And, sometimes when we talk about inclusion or equity, we face barriers. But to hear that there were other people that face very similar barriers, even though they may play out slightly differently, that intersectionality becomes really important across all those sectors. So when you start to hear it as a true story and a true experience, then you start to understand that there's a lot we all face, but people face it in different ways. And I don't think you get that just from the words themselves, but you get it from the real lived experience stories from that point of view.
Yeah,
I think one of it is, there's a lot of diversity across our broader communities, and the organisations we've been working with are learning not just about equity and, inclusive practices, but learning about that diversity becomes really important, and that, all we're basically seeking, whether it's minority groups, underrepresented groups, but even in the mainstream, is, equity and value and respect as much as anything else. And so we can face barriers that look very different, but the reason for the barriers can be very much the same, which is why the education is so important, that barrier sits there because of what you mentioned earlier about your learnt experience and maybe assumptions or stereotypes or whatever it might be. How do you unlearn those to view people, for who they are as the person, not just as the topic?
Yeah, that's so spot on. You've been at Koorie Heritage Trust has been the lead First Nations training partner on Fair Play since it started in 2019. What do you think the outcomes and impacts have been from your perspective?
I know from talking to some of the organisations since we've gone through training sessions with them and ran workshops with them, that they are actually impacting quite well with First Nations people. People they already had employed with some, but also new as well. And so I do believe they're getting things right, which is good. And they've taken those steps to, ensure that what they're doing with new people within their organisations, but also people they already had, is of a new level. Especially from that value and respect point of view, and creating safer spaces for First Nations people to engage in. From a trust point of view, there has been a little bit of benefit. I think I've learnt a bit about the industry, and I've learnt a bit, like I said, having that opportunity to engage with some of the other presenters and, the barriers they face. So I always enjoy being on my own learning journey from that perspective. But if I want to talk about it from a business point of view, we are actually still engaging quite well with, different groups as well, in terms of continuing to run new workshops for the broader staff of the organisations that weren't engaged necessarily in the program, but are now engaged because of the program, which is great. So Australian Ballet, for example, that we're just talking about being one of those. I think one of my fun experiences was Chunky Move, and the fact that, they actually had us or me engaged in the development of their equity plan and sitting down with all their staff and workshopping with them. And so it's taken that next level of not just the education, but what the practical look of it might start to be. But I also see the more broader benefit across the industry in terms of, the equity plans that I've had, the opportunity to read through and give some advice to. And I think the benefits are going to be really long-term. Even if we can't see them just yet, as they're still writing and putting these things together, what they're thinking about and how they're going about it, I think will make, long-term change more broadly.
Thank you for that too. And I should say thank you for all of that hard work of reading through all the equity plans. It's really important work. And they're exciting because they're plans that are really action-based. And that's an important component of them.
There's going to be change in a really good way, I think.
There will be. I kind of feel like it's already happening. If the organisations, particularly those that participated, continue this work, what do you imagine the creative sector will be like in 5 years' time?
Oh, that's a really good question. You'd like the crystal ball things, and just imagine that. I'm just trying to think. I was about to say that everything would be fine, but it's so much more than that, isn't it? That, that participation side of things, regardless of background, regardless of upbringing, whatever your background is, that you can just walk into, any part of the arts industry and you're valued and respected for the person that you are without question. And I think for me, that would be the ultimate. In 5 years' time, it's not saying that you don't see background anymore, but you're valued for your background and that you're embraced for that.
That's the art sector I want to be in, or the creative industries I want to participate in.
And an example could be, because you're Aboriginal, you walk into, somewhere, whether it's work or as an artist, and there's an expectation, you're Aboriginal, so you must want to do this, or what you're going to do will look like this. But it doesn't have to be. That Aboriginal person can walk in and say, this is actually how I like to express myself, and this is what it looks like. And so that's what's valued, is the person and how they express themselves, and we're not looking at the background and predetermining what they should be doing.
You've kind of answered all of my questions, but I wanted to ask, is there anything else that you want to add?
Part of the experience I got in working with the organisations that were in attendance at the workshops, and even some of the stuff I've done, since those workshops, it's not just a genuine desire to do the right thing. It's actually a genuine, walking of that path from that point of view. And I think what I did see was the fact that people really want to do this, and there is value in the work that they're doing, and they're not doing it to tick boxes. They're not doing it because, it's, PC from that perspective, but they actually do want to make a difference through their organisations and the work they do with diversity. And I think that's actually something that came through well, because you said it before, a lot of the organisations are already doing a lot of good things.
Thanks for having this chat with me about fair play. Why is it so important to have an equity and inclusion program that's participatory like fair play across the creative industries in Victoria?
I think that thanks to Creative State 2025, there's now a very clear direction about cultural equity. And I think the reality is that everybody is committed to equity. Everybody wants it as a kind of, everyone's committed to it, but people don't necessarily know how to achieve it, or have fears about getting it wrong or whatever. So to be part of a program like Fair Play, I think allays a lot of fears and actually gives people some really specific, detailed and experiential information about how they can actually achieve those things.
And so in your opinion, why do you think that it's important to have a program like Fair Play, which is led by people with lived experience? Or why is it important that programs like this are led by people with lived experience?
From the disability perspective, as a community, we're so used to being talked for, where people advise others on what we need without actually consulting us. So it's a very familiar feeling to not have a voice in that space from the disability community perspective. So it's crucial, actually, that it is our voice that fills that space. Not AAV's voice, but kind of deaf and disabled people themselves filling that space. I think there's also something about what I've found through delivering the training for Fair Play is that so many of the organisations have needed, yes, is information, but mostly it's confidence. It's confidence to trust themselves in the skills that they have. It's permission to get things wrong and to try stuff out. It's, for many of them, I potentially am the first disabled person that they've actually met. And so, because I think lots of the disability community lives as a philanthropic group that sits somewhere outside of their organisation. So to be someone that can talk from a first person perspective and disability being part of identity, I think potentially was really critical in this space. So yeah, just to summarise, I think it's about confidence, and that the confidence that comes through those interactions. I think it's about permission to get it wrong, to ask questions, and I suppose also to get curious and to really see this as an opportunity, because I think access and disability often are seen as really problematic. And I think through these training sessions, people have really started to shift their thinking around, oh my gosh, this is super exciting, and this is a place we haven't been before, and it presents so many new creative options for us, or organisational options for us. So yeah, I think that's, for me, part of it.
We've been really fortunate that Arts Access Victoria has been a key partner on Fair Play since 2019. From your perspective, what have been some of the outcomes and impacts of the program?
I think we've had some fascinating conversations that people never imagined themselves having. It's been super exciting to deliver. I've been lucky enough to be the one that's delivered all of the Fair Play training. So to see the diversity and vastness of the organisations that have been involved in the training, I think we will have ongoing relationships with some of these people. I think there is now a desire, in a way that there hasn't been, to sort of continue to engage, or to begin to engage deaf and disabled artists and audiences in the work that they're doing in a way that they may not have felt comfortable or confident to in the past. And I think, the outcomes won't be evident for a few years, but I think the wheels are definitely in motion for lots of organisations in a way that they haven't been before. And also a sense of urgency, actually. I think that's what I've really felt, is that there's an urgency around equity now that there hasn't been. But now I feel like there's an acknowledgement that there is inequity and that it's something that needs to be addressed. And the Fair Play program has really helped people to start to make a plan around how they're going to shift that thinking and those behaviours.
That's so spot on. In the 20 plus years that I've spent in the arts in Australia, I've never felt such urgency for change or such acknowledgement of inequity existing. If organisations continue to build on what they've learned in Fair Play, and you know, this kind of work continues across the creative industries in Victoria, how do you imagine the Victorian creative industries would be in 5 years from now?
My ambition is always that the landscape will change. And I think that there is the potential for the creative landscape to really shift in 5 years. again, it comes back to that sense of urgency. And I think even though a global pandemic hasn't been the driver that we've quite wanted, I think it's actually been really helpful, because if we think about all of the delivery has had to happen digitally, and we may not have got to that place had we not had to. My hope would be that there will be greater financial and funding support for deaf and disabled artists to make work. There will be more platforms eager and willing to show and platform the work of deaf and disabled artists. Deaf and disabled artists will be employed throughout organisations, and we'll be seeing work of a calibre developed in collaboration with organisations that may never have imagined themselves there. And of course, audiences, we know that there is a desire for people to see new stories on stage and to be able to see themselves reflected back. So if we have more deaf and disabled artists producing work on our stages, on our screens, in and around us, then there is more likely to be greater audience engagement in that work as well, especially if we can maintain this digital space that we've activated so beautifully in the last 18 months out of necessity.
The busyness of life in the arts and in the world in general quite often makes it difficult to bring people together. It's definitely, for a lot of people, made it much more accessible to do the training and to do the work. So, and who would have thought, who would have thought that would be the case, or that it would be in a way so much easier to run the training online, although not without its challenges in terms of breakouts and online safety and all of that. Thank you so much, Caroline, for chatting with me. And we look forward to, I guess, working out how we can continue to work with you in a way that's going to build on what we've learned from this program.
It's instigated us developing training that we may never have done for a couple more years. So the fact that you came to us, the stars aligned, really. So the training program that we developed for Fair Play, the two of them. So one about ableism, addressing ableism in the workplace, and also the cultural safety from a disability perspective. They were both seeds that were planted from Fair Play to us. And it was then up to us to step up to that plate, and we have. And what that's allowed us to do then is to be able to not just use those trainings in a fair play context, but that information has been relevant across the industry to other organisations that potentially haven't been part of the program. So I thank you for your instigation and for taking us into those spaces too, with the request that you made.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and we've all learned so much. Feel very, very lucky to have been part of the program, and hopefully you'll see an improvement in our practice in years to come as well at Diversity Arts and the work that we're doing with migrant and culturally diverse communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lena.
Paula, thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation about the Fair Play program. What was distinctive about this program in particular?
Distinctive in that we had 2 years. I think that was really important aspect of this program, that often in this space of change. So the 2 years provided an opportunity for reflection. It provided an opportunity to make meaning out of our evaluations. It meant that whilst working with organisations across the creative industries, we constantly were gathering data and evidence to ensure that all aspects of the project, whether it was the delivery or the planning or the participation of organisations in the project, were fully supported. So in terms of a distinctive project. I think Fair Play, we had kind of really critical, a critical outlook. So having a critical outlook for me meant that we were responsive to change, so that we could literally change direction if it wasn't producing the kinds of what I would call critical outcomes and impacts that an equity program should. So the other distinction for me is the intersectional aspect, that we had an opportunity to work across rather than in the usual silos of equity.
What are some of the strengths, in your opinion, of the program, and what are the possibilities that it might bring for the future?
For me, the strengths really were in the participation of committed people and committed partners, certainly, and I think especially those who came to the project with generosity and openness and sharing. It was really important in this space to acknowledge that intersectionality is a practice and that it's grounded in Black feminism and its origins come from anti-racism labour and work. And so it was really important for me as a trainer that was the integrity of intersectionality was practice, and I would like to see that integrity and that commitment to working intersectionally into the future. The other point I would really like to make is I think applying theories of cultural studies, especially around representation, especially around participation, were really important for me. So cultural studies is often something a lot of people talk about, but actually applying it and practicing it in the creative sectors is really important. So for me, as a trainer, I would like to see the histories and genealogies of cultural studies, the intellectual labour of First Nations thinkers and activists and people of colour, that their labour is applied, acknowledged, credited, and that I think will take us into a future where equity is not just a vision, but it's a practice, it's a way of being, it's lived.
Is there anything else you wanted to add or mention about the Fair Play program?
Fair Play for me was a critical program because the focus was on systemic and structural change. So much energy and resources are spent on individual contexts and cosmetic diversity and the facade of change that over 30 years, I haven't seen any real, change in terms of power, in terms of systems being dismantled. And that's certainly what needs to happen because the systems we work within and we push against are oppressive. And so Fair Play was really important because we focused on systemic and structural change. And I think that's the only way we make sustainable, transformative change.
Margaret, as the project coordinator and also as a disabled artist yourself, what are the outcomes that you hope the Fair Play program will reap, and what have been some of the outcomes that you've already witnessed?
So I came into the Fair Play project after living in Melbourne for 10 years, and I was acutely aware of and very frustrated with Melbourne, at least the Melbourne visual art scene being something that seemed very white and very ableist and very middle class and even quite heterosexist as a sort of an art scene. So I wanted to see change and be part of that change, which has been great. In the long term, what I'd like to see for myself is to sort of see disabled practitioners not just regarded as, say, clients of particular arts programs, but actually respected as artists, as teachers, as colleagues and leaders of the arts, because we're everywhere. But and also as people who aren't just white, because it's there's also a lot of issues of people siloing different things. But things that I've seen, which is really great, is certainly a lot more awareness that there's really interesting creative practice that's occurring. And I've sort of seen a much more apparent desire to involve and be led by First Nations practitioners and communities. There's much more sort of apparent desire to sort of be guided by disabled practitioners and advisors. And there's starting to be, but there's a long way to go, to start to actually engage at least with culturally and linguistically diverse artists. But yes, there's a lot more work to be done there.
So what is unique or has really stood out to you about Fair Play? And particularly in terms of the program design?
Other kind of diversity and inclusion programs or projects, they're usually a very much a service delivery model, which is someone will contract an organisation or come in and they'll go, yep, this is what we know how to do and we'll do it. And it's kind of fixed. This was really exciting, not only because it was stopping the siloing, it was actually working across 3 very distinct and diverse areas, but also it was genuinely co-designed. We'd sort of plan something, we'd consult with people, we'd try it, we'd test it, we'd go, okay, right, what's our feedback from this? Okay, no, we have to modify. We'll try this. And so it was really, really exciting. I mean, I've spent, years in academia, but the level of sort of research, applied research and seeing that actually have impacts was absolutely amazing. And I think something that I think everyone involved in the project can be really, really proud of. And I think the other thing that's been really good to emerge from the project is sort of seeing the development of a very rigorous evaluation framework and project. So there's a lot of diversity action plans, equity and inclusion plans. But what we've developed in Fair Play is a very rigorous and accountable mechanism for actual change. And that came from the mentors, people who are skilled, who've been advocating this space for a long time and saying, okay, how do we actually assess that these plans actually mean equity, and mean justice and are accountable to the communities which they're supposedly including. And, we've also got a process where plans can be assessed by independent peer reviewers who are, again, people from marginalised communities. And I don't think I've seen or heard of that anywhere. And it's another thing I'm really, really glad came out of it. And the other things are probably what our other speakers have spoken about, like seeing that there is, I think there is a greater commitment by organisations to rethink and involve more diverse artists and communities. And I think what's also been really exciting is to sort of see a very palpable network of First Nations, disabled and culturally and linguistically diverse advisors and practitioners that know each other and that are also known to arts organisations in Victoria. So, so it's great. And I think some of the smaller highlights have hopefully been covered by the other speakers. But, seeing these things happen has been great.
So I just want to say thanks for joining me to have this chat online, Nicole. And I wanted to ask you to just introduce yourself and your title.
I'm Nicole Beyer. I'm the Executive Director of Theatre Network Australia. And I'm calling in today or Zooming in today or being filmed today on Wurundjeri land.
So can I just start by asking you, Nicole, what the responsibility is of organisations like Theatre Network Australia to act on equity and inclusion?
So first of all, just as a funded organisation, there's actually it's almost a remit to be working on behalf of the Australian public. And the Australian public is made up of a whole lot of different people, not just white able-bodied people. So in that way, actually, if we're thinking about the Australian public, then as a funded organisation, we have an obligation to make sure that we're working on behalf of everybody in Australia, internally as an organisation, but then, of course, also as an organisation that has a leadership role in the sector. We have a strong obligation to support and compel our members and our sector to also be as inclusive as they can be with their audiences, with their staff, with their participants. And because we're leaders, we have to do that and lead by example. There are advantages, as you know, in being a diverse organisation or being a part of a diverse community. And I think the corporate sector has got this really, really well. They understand that having diversity in your organisation or on your board, it brings competitive advantages. So we need to see it not as a sort of a deficit, but as an asset. And in the arts, that means you will be telling more relevant stories. You will have wider audiences. You will have, more creative ideas coming in, different perspectives.
What have been some of the impacts or tangible outcomes of Fair Play for Theatre Network Australia?
It's such a great program to be a part of for those couple of years that we were a part of it. The most formal thing is we wrote an equity action plan with all of the team and the board, and with your guidance at Fair Play. That's a fantastic outcome. Obviously, that's not the only thing, but it's a formal guiding document with actions and goals. And it gives us a roadmap to do the work that we want to do over the next, and we've already started doing that work. It sits alongside our strategic plan. So the strategic plan and the equity action plan, now have to be read together, and they inform each other. So our strategic plan, the first 5 objectives are all about justice and equity, and that they're reflected in the equity action plan. But the equity action plan has more specific targets in there. But it's not enough to just have a document. Those things have to be embedded in the organisation. So the work that we've been doing has been to go, okay, what are all the different ways that we can embed justice and equity in our organisation? And that's in everyone's position description. Everybody has justice and equity and how it is reflected in the work that they do. It's in our employment policy and processes. It's in our board matrix and our board succession plan. And it's in all of our program design. So when we're designing a program, then we look at that with our justice and equity lens. It's affirmative action, but in an unapologetic way, like it's actually being proactive at every opportunity.
No, that's really exciting to hear that. How do you plan to progress equity into the future?
At the moment, it's a white-led organisation. I'm a second-generation European migrant, but identify as a white person. Our chair of the board is a white person. We want to shift away from that. So we have succession plans. So at the AGM next year, we will be changing to a First Nations chair. In terms of staff, we've through our employment policy and processes, we ensure that we're employing people from a range of different backgrounds. We have a plan for an associate director role that is designated First Nations, deaf and disabled, or a person of colour. That's in our funding application to Creative Victoria at the end of the year. And that will be a dedicated succession plan. So we're doing that as a part of what we're calling the Associate Executive Collective, where we're going to train people, not assume that they're going to step up into that specific organisation, but they will eventually take on a leadership role. The culture of an organisation is important. We talked about embedding everything into what you do. And culture is a hard thing to understand what it is. But actually, if you break it down, it's just a whole series of proactive, conscious tasks and a way of operating in a day-to-day way, on a day-to-day level. How do you have conversations about equity and justice at a staff level? Well, then you do it in your staff meetings. At a board level, you make sure that it's on the agenda at board meetings. You make sure that the staff are reading documents and articles about justice and equity. And you make sure that your documents aren't documents that are developed once and then set aside. So you have to be operating in a way that it is using your strategic plan or your equity action plan as a living document. So, are you reviewing them regularly? When you program, are you referring back to those documents to decide on what you're going to, be programming and choosing? If you're invited onto a panel, are you questioning who's on that panel? We have a policy now that we don't sit on all white panels. We have to be proactive. It has to be in everything that you do in your organisation and in your day. And it's a great way of being too, because you can have really great conversations about, diversity and equity and all of the really tricky things about representation and identity. They're not always easy conversations to have. And in the arts and culture sector at the moment, we're having some of those difficult conversations. So if it becomes a part of how you talk within your organisation, then it is easier to lead the sector and to have those conversations more broadly with other people. And not to be afraid to go to hard places, to challenge yourself and learn and unlearn, and to change your mind about things and to reflect and acknowledge that it's hard, but keep going, keep going. Yeah, and don't give up. And know that you will fail. At some moment you will fail because you'll say something wrong or you'll do something wrong, but that doesn't mean you can't keep on going. Fair Play gave us the space to have those conversations actually with amazing leaders who showed us how to explore all of those tricky things as well as the things that, are really clear to do, to explore the tricky conversations about identity and representation. Because they're out there, those tricky conversations. So to have that guidance was really fantastic. It empowered us actually, the program.
Thank you for joining me and having this chat online. Katie, for people who don't know you, can you introduce yourself?
So, my name's Katie Stewart and I'm the General Manager of the Victorian Music Development Office. So for those that don't know what we do, we provide support directly to the Victorian music industry and the businesses within it. We know that Victoria's music industry is largely made up of micro and small music businesses. So we look to bring support directly to them so they can continue what they do best. So the Victorian Music Development Office is actually a project of Creative Victoria. Yeah, we're all a part of the Music Victoria family and the great work that they do as peak body for contemporary music in the state.
Can you tell me about the impact that the Fair Play program had on Music Victoria and the Vmdo?
The program was hugely impactful. I think for coming in from two angles from Music Victoria, because Music Victoria is an established organisation. It's been around for over 11 years now, coming up 12 years. And Vmdo was a new project at the time, and we act as an organisation in our own right to some degree. So I think looking at it in that sort of two-prong approach, it was really beneficial for sort of the established organisation, the long-standing staff members, to take a step back and really look at the equity and inclusion practices within the organisation. And then from the Vmdo side, it was really exciting that we were able to participate in Fair Play in, really early days for Vmdo, and it certainly had a huge impact on our approach to, the design and creation of the programs that we were looking to deliver for the Victorian music industry. Not only was it really impactful in terms of the way that we looked, at the organisation and what we were delivering, but it was hugely inspiring because we, stepped away from that program thinking that was one of the most practical programs that we've been a part in terms of really driving forward change within arts and creative industries. And we thought, well, why couldn't we deliver something like that for commercial music businesses, which is exactly the type of businesses that we work with within Vmdo. So really the program, took on somewhat of a life of its own beyond us just participating as an organisation. We then went in and had really incredible conversations with yourself, Lena, and the rest of the Diversity Arts team in terms of what would this look like if we took this, really well thought out structure of this program, but we made adaptations to best support the Victorian music industry. And, from there we've incredibly, it's kind of crazy to look back and look at the amount of work that we've done, but delivered 2 rounds of the Fair Play program for the Victorian music industry, one in late 2020 and one in, the first half of 2021. So certainly it's been just life-changing, career-changing for not only the way that we work, but, the way that we've been able to now have a flow-on effect to the 8 music businesses that have gone through the program has just been really, really tremendous.
It's been really good for us as well, because working with you did actually strengthen our offering as well to the music industry. So thank you for that. Are there tangible outcomes that you're aware of for the 8 music businesses who participated in Fair Play? And, what do you think the impacts of these outcomes would be on the Victorian music industry?
Of course. And I just want to reflect back on something you said about sort of the nature of collaborating together and putting the program together. And from our side, we're also really grateful how open you and your team were in terms of, the structure of the program was very well developed, but it wasn't, super rigid. So, we really appreciate that flexibility to make it fit for the Victorian music industry. In terms of outcomes for the participants that have gone through the program so far, I mean, we know that the arts, the creative industries right across the board has had a really challenging time throughout COVID and, music industry in particular. And it's been really impressive talking to all of these businesses about how passionate they feel about implementing their equity action plans that they've developed over the last 2 years with DARTS. Some of the examples about practical outcomes, we've had businesses come away and say, well, what we're going to do is adopt a policy where we're going to budget welcome to countries across all of our tour budgets. And that's the new standard. That's something that they value, and they look to talk to, whether it's the domestic artist, the international artist, about how important this element is for them within delivering a tour, and the flow-on effect, and just the sort of beautiful tone that sets for not only the audience, but I think that it has this really beautiful way to unite the crew, unite the performers, and really take a step back to sort of acknowledge country that they're performing on. And we know that a lot of the groups that undertook the Fair Play program, they'll have set team members that went through it week after week, did the workshops, with the incredible trainers, and mentors provided by Diversity Arts Australia. But then a lot of the organisations have then taken a step back to say, well, what else can we deliver ongoing to a broader team? Because, if they have a team of 50 people, if they have a team of 300 plus people, not everyone's going to take part in the program training, but many of the businesses have really prioritised that training ongoing for their staff. And recruitment, I feel like, is a really common theme as well in terms of, the makeup of their staff, the makeup of their leadership teams, the considerations around diversity within that. I feel like that's a common theme that we're hearing again and again for the organisations.
What advice would you give to organisations or businesses who want to embark on the work of equity and inclusion?
I was having a think about this, and it was actually some advice that I have handed down in these 2 iterations of the program to Victorian music industry, and that main thing that I want those organisations to walk away from the introduction is that they should acknowledge that the program isn't easy. It really can be quite mentally challenging at times, but we really encourage everyone who takes part to lean into that uncertainty, to lean into the fear, and to, know that they're in really, really good expert hands with the darts team, and with all the amazing facilitators, trainers and mentors. And I've mentioned it before, but this program is certainly the most practical I've seen in terms of diversity and inclusion training. So that really means a lot in terms of the way that people can envision the change that, that they want to make within their organisations, because they're working towards practical outcomes and they're working towards a tailor-made equity action plan that they build alongside the rest of their team and with their mentors. So the payoff for this work, for this really challenging work, mentally, that's certainly going to sort of disrupt, the status quo and disrupt the way that many people think day to day, is just hugely beneficial in the long run.
Is there anything else you wanted to add that I might not have captured?
I suppose just to say, that the flow-on impacts of the program, really can't be understated. I think that we've seen some real wonderful camaraderie actually between the businesses that undertook the Fair Play program within the music industry together, because these businesses are essentially competitors. They work in a commercial sphere. Often they're competing for, different artists, but this program really united them, and I think many people came away, particularly in 2020, because the program coincided with the large lockdown towards the end of the year in Victoria. I had so many participants come up to me, within the past year and just say, I can't thank Vmdo and I can't thank Diversity Arts Australia enough for that program. It really has been absolutely life-changing. So I think it's really been wonderful to see how those businesses have not only been able to grow within, what they want to achieve and, their sort of broader vision for what they deliver as a commercial business, but they've also strengthened their relationships with their peers as well, because they've now got this common goal and this commonality that, we very much want to keep that going, and to sort of keep the alumni aspect of the program going. So that will be, the next stage for us, and to sort of keep building on the work that's been undertaken over the past few years. So thank you again, Lena, and thank you to Gurkham and Sonia and the extended team. That you've all been absolutely wonderful, and these learnings will really stay with us for life.
Thanks for sticking around and joining us for this event. I really enjoyed those conversations, and I hope you did too. Thank you to our speakers and to all of you, our audiences. Thanks to our fabulous supporters at the Wheeler Centre for helping us to pull this together in a time of COVID, in particular Gab Ryan, Simon Cotter and Caro Llewellyn. Thank you again to Creative Victoria and the Victorian Government for your vision and commitment to this program. It's so rare to have support for a program like this. Thank you to the fantastic 28 Victorian organisations and businesses who put in the time and effort to participate. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the hard work of Project Coordinator Margaret Mayhew, Lead Trainer Educator Paula Abood, Producer Maylee Hunt, Producers Mahla Karamian and in 2019 UB Lee, Trainer Mentor and Music Industries Program Coordinator Gurkham Ajaralu, and our wonderful mentors Kahava Lillet, Hua Pham, Maria Randall, Eleanor Jackson, Noor Shikembi, Andy Butler and Jackie Brown. And of course our core training and project partners Koorie Heritage Trust, Arts Access Victoria and the Victorian Music Development Office. And thank you to our many trainers and educators, Genevieve Greaves and Lily Brown from Garawa, Garen Steele from Boonwurrung, Uncle Bill Nichols and the Wurundjeri Tribal Council, Janice Florence from Arts Access Victoria, and many more who are listed on our website. I'd also like to acknowledge Regional Arts Victoria, Abbotsford Convent, MAV, or Multicultural Arts Victoria, Footscray Community Arts Centre for their partnership and support. There are many more people to thank, so if you're interested in finding out more about the program, you can head to the Fair Play page on the Diversity Arts website, diversityarts.org.au.